Good morning to everyone. My name is Luis Mansur from the Central Bank of Brazil. I'm very grateful to chair this panel, which will discuss financial inclusion, a subject that is very close related to our work at the Central Bank. Therefore, it's a subject that is very dear to me personally. We have here with us today 6 experts whom I would like to introduce to you. Mr. Frederico Mendelman from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Frederico will present his paper, FinTech Entry, Firm Financial Inclusion and Macroeconomic Dynamics in Emerging Economies. Mr. Felipe Tonkowski from INSPER will be the discussant for this paper. Next, we'll have Felipe presenting his paper, Data Accumulation of Poor CCT Beneficiary Households, Evidence from Brazil using a novel-rich administrative data set. Mr. Sérgio Miquil will then, from the Central Bank of Brazil, will be the discussant for that paper. And last but not least, Miquil will present his paper, The Long-Term Impact of High School Financial Education, Evidence from Brazil. And then Frederico will be the discussant for this last paper. Before starting, gentlemen, some ground rules. Each speaker will have 20 minutes for his presentation. Each discussant will then have 10 minutes for his comments. And at the end of the presentations, there will be 10 minutes for questions from the audience, right? Okay, so for the sake of time, without further ado, Frederico, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't know if you can listen to me. That's okay, or?
I can listen to you, but I don't know if the audience...
Yes, maybe, okay.
Can you listen?
I'm just standing up. Anyway, so this is the paper I have with Alan. He's in Tufts University, Victoria Luger at the IDB. So we're here, this is the second day. I don't need to explain to you that we know that firms in emerging markets face significant barriers to access to credit. We see that the market is typically dominated by oligopolistic banks, and these oligopolistic banks provide credit to firms that are typically larger firms or formal firms. But in our countries, the majority of firms are small, informal, and they also account for a large share of employment. There are some studies that show that the finance gaps are about 20 to 30% of GDP, and actually Stephen Class showed some data yesterday confirming these results. There are still big financial gaps. But what we're seeing lately is that there are growing levels of digital adoption, and also we have this revolutionary advent of financial technologies or fintechs. And we see that, I'm going to show you that in some cases, the number of fintechs in countries in the region, in South America, they increased in a single year by 50%. And the interesting part about this is that they are focused on smaller firms that are being typically unbanked. So that's something that is very important also in terms of employment. So not only they have the role of bolstering financial inclusion, but also in a market that was traditionally oligopolistic, this can put the competition in these credit markets. So what we want to do in this paper, so we have essentially 3 questions, maybe too many questions for a single paper. But first of all, we want to evaluate what are the implications of enhanced financial inclusion. We want to see what is the impact of this fintech revolution on the stability of the traditional banking system and the implications for macroeconomic volatility. So what we're going to develop, and the model is very rich, I will just show you the bones of it. It's a quantitative analysis of fintech entry using a standard small open economy model. So in the model, we have 3 important novelties. One is that we have firm creation, and also an endogenously driven firm heterogeneity in access to credit via technological adoption that I will explain in a second. We're going essentially to have 2 types of financial institutions in this setup. We're going to have traditional banks that are going to be monopolistic, and they are going to cater big formal incumbent firms. But then we're going to allow to this oligopolistic bank, at any point in time, we're going to have fintech entry. So the number of fintechs are going to build over time, and the market for these fintechs is going to be mostly a sub-segment of unbanked firms that are going to be attracted by these new participants in the market. So we're going to calibrate the model to match some key facts in the financial inclusion, some cyclical characteristics of the economies, and also, if I have time, I will try to elaborate into the macro dynamics. So what are the main findings of the model? We want to analyze both the long run and also the business cycle impact of fintech. We see that if we focus on a state analysis, fintech competition, of course, is going to essentially crowd out some of the deposits that go to traditional banks. So the credit offer for traditional banks are going to drop, and we're going to see an increasing role for fintech. But overall, the impact is going to be beneficial. We're going to have higher consumption, we're going to have more credit, and also we're going to have an increase in GDP that is significant. When we look at the business cycle in the short run, we see that whenever there is fintech, it's true that surprisingly, perhaps there is a decrease in output volatility, but we're going to see that the relative volatility of consumption is going to increase significantly, and this is going to be the byproduct of increasing bank credit volatility. And the point that we're going to make in this paper that the response of financial inclusion is going to depend on what is the root cause of this greater fintech entry. We're going to distinguish, and I will be more clear later in the presentation, supply versus demand-driven channels. So a few facts about this financial inclusion. So these are, we have a lot of numbers here, but I just want you to focus on a few of them. So importantly, these are small and middle-sized enterprises in the US. We see that, in the region, in emerging countries. So essentially, informal, medium, and small-sized enterprises account for 75%, 3/4 of the total amount of the total number of these firms. So most of the small and middle-sized enterprises in emerging economies are informal. And even if we look at the formal firms, most of them are unbanked. So that means that there is a big gap in terms of credit to GDP in these economies that can go between 10 to 20% of GDP. When we look at digital adoption, the numbers are striking, and this is just a few numbers that I put here, but again, let's focus on the number of fintechs. And here we have data for 2 years, 2017 and 2019. In just a single year, the number of fintechs have increased by 50%, 52%. The same if we look at digital payments. In just 3 years, a 30% increase almost in digital payments. So we see that this is something big. It's coming like a big shock to these economies. And also we see it in South America. So here I want you, don't look at the numbers here because these are essentially, these are the mean data. We look at interest rates spreads over this is for Brazil, over the policy rate, the Selic. But the message that I want to take from this graph, here we have data from 2017 to 2023. In yellow, you are going to see the net entry of fintechs, entry minus exit. So you see that there was essentially year over year a sustained increase in the number of fintechs in Brazil. But then when we look at the interest rates, and again, these are interest rates spreads over the central bank policy rate, the Selic, we see that as more fintechs enter the market, the interest rates, the average interest rates charged by these fintechs have been decreasing significantly. But not only they are competing against other fintechs, that's the blue line, but if we look at the black line is the interest rate charged by traditional banks, have also been decreased. I mean, the spreads or the interest margins charged by traditional banks face the competition of fintech. So essentially, this is a pro-competitive effect that is important to highlight. How much time I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. I need to go fast. So here we have, when we presented this data, I said, don't mention what is the fintech that you are going to say, but I think that we are here in Brazil, and if you see the color, it's going to be very clear. And by the way, where is Rafaela? I haven't seen, Rafael. Okay, I recognize you, okay. So we're working with Nubank, and we're trying to get data from Nubank. So this is very much work in progress. The main goal of our work is to be like empirical and to get data. So we're working, Rafaela, getting this data. But just to give you an impression of how big this is. So this is data in a single year for this bank. And we see that the customer base has increased year over year 38%. That's an amazing growth. And what is interesting is that even though there is a big, massive expansion on the credit base, when we look at non-performing loans, either 50 or 90 days, over the whole period, it's not that they are catering more risky entrepreneurs or, they are giving credit to, going back to the discussion we had yesterday, to people that don't have the means to pay. But overall, we see that the default rates, even during COVID or in this big increase in interest rates in Brazil that we had last year, the default rates remain relatively low. And when we look at default rates, compared to the market, these are non-performing loans 90 days or over. Here we have different income levels as, multiply, by the minimum wage. We look at less than minimum wage or more or et cetera. And, at different income levels, you see that the default rates are very low. So the message that I want to take for this is that there seems to be that it was a big gap in finance. We have some borrowers that have the capability to take loans and to repay, and they were not being served by traditional banks. And this, big fintech revolution is actually filling the gaps, and it's going to have important implications for these economies. But well, I want to go very quickly to the model. The model is just an RBC model. It's an open economy. We have firms, a traditional banking system, fintech intermediaries. Both entry by firms and fintech entry are endogenous, and they are subject to some entry costs. We're going to have two firm categories. We're going to have financially excluded and included. So essentially, this is the variety produced by each firm in each of these categories. We're going to have an endogenous measure of firms. Each firm that wants to enter the market, they have to pay a sunk entry cost, and they're going to suffer an exit-inducing probability that is pinned down by this parameter. So when we look at the output for each sector for financially excluded that we can consider to be informal firms or the more traditional formal firms, this is going to be the total output. Let's go first to the big, larger traditional firms. For these firms, the entry cost is going to be much higher, but by paying a higher entry cost, they are going to have access to bank credit and also to a more productive technology. They will have to finance a wage bill. This is the share of the wage bill that they have to finance. And the lending rate is going to be this one. So essentially, if we look at the profits from traditional firms, this is going to be the revenue, technology times, the labor that they hire. They have to pay for wages. But the key part is that in order to pay for these wages, they have to get some bank credit. And this is going to be the wage bill that they're going to finance from traditional banks. The pricing will be standard, essentially a markup over cost, and the cost will include wages, but also this financial cost that comes to funding the wage bill that is being paid to traditional banks. Now, the important thing is about what we call these informal small firms, or what we call financially excluded firms. These firms that also have to pay an entry cost, but it's going to be very small. The problem is that it's not difficult for them to enter the marketplace, but they don't have credit access, they are informal, and of course they're going to operate a much less productive technology. But upon entry, each firm is going to draw idiosyncratic productivity. And we're going to say that if productivity is below some certain threshold, they're going to remain low tech. But if somewhat they are productive enough, they will pay an extra cost to get access to fintech credit. So what is this extra cost that we're going to call that this is like a demand-driven for fintech? So here we can consider, for instance, if you need to open an e-commerce platform or you have to take a widespread source of digital payments, or you have to digitize the payment for inputs and labor, all that digitalization that is required to get funding from fintechs is going to be in this parameter. So apart from that, they are going to work very similar. So they will have to pay not only this fintech cost, but also they will have to finance a portion of the wage bill. So we can, derive in demand functions. We have endogenous, average productivity levels for these firms that are either taking credit or choose not to take credit from fintechs, and then two endogenous fund segments. So when we look at the traditional banks, so we have the traditional banks that we have two models. I'm going to present the simple one with monopolistic competition, but also the more elaborated model we allow for a straight oligopolistic setting in the banking industry. So these are the traditional banks that are going to face the increasing competition from fintechs entering the marketplace. So these fintechs entering the marketplace, they will have to pay also a sunk entry cost. And we're going to say that this entry cost may be affected by the regulation of the financial industry that will allow for more of these fintechs to come into the system. So this will be more like a supply-driven increase for fintech credit. The regulation will allow for more participants to take place in this market. So the pricing will be similar, but the important point, of course, is that as more fintechs enter the market, the average interest rate charged on entrepreneurs is going to be lower. So for households, I'm going to skip this slide. I'm running out of time. The quantitative analysis is fairly simple, but again, we are working with the data that we are getting access from this Brazilian fintech. So our hope is that the discipline of the model will be better, and we may have to do some changes to the model, but so far we do something simple. We use traditional parameterization. We use the literature to calibrate the shocks to financial and productivity for interest rate shocks, and then we try to match some targets. So far what we find is that it's important whether the increase in fintechs come from the demand side. So if the demand for fintech credit comes from the fact that these firms are willing to pay the digital cost to get access, that is going to have an important implication for output. So over long horizons, we see that if we have an increase in fintech firms by 52%, that is the number that I just showed you before, aggregate output is going to increase by about 2%, and average fintech credit is going to increase significantly, and also we're going to have a significant decrease in the interest rate spreads that this financial system is charging to firms. So let me move. So in summary, we have two mechanisms in place. So the idea is that there is going to be like an endogenous productivity component as a larger subsegment of firms are going to be able to adapt the fintech credit. And also the important thing is that these fintechs are going to be pro-competitive, so are going to essentially disrupt the oligopolistic banking setup, and this will lead to lower spreads and lower interest rates for firms in this economy. So these are, how much is that? 1 minute, no?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, so here are some long-term dynamics, and it's interesting to see that when the demand comes from when this increase in fintech is coming from the demand from firms, the results are going to be more robust. And actually, the trade-off with bank credit is not going to be as big. So we're going to have the fact that we have more firms entering the market. We're going to see that overall credit is going to increase. But if the increase in fintechs is only the result of changes in the regulation, then essentially what they're going to do is they're going to crowd out the amount of credit given by banks. So here we see that in this data, this is the supply driven increase in fintech that is going to displace traditional banks alone, but with limited impacts on output and consumptions. But if the increase in fintechs coming mostly from increasing demand and increasing entry of firms into the economy, then it's true that we're going to have some displacements in bank credit, but it's going to be relatively small. And overall, we're going to have higher increase in consumption and higher increase in the number of fintechs. So going back very quickly to volatility, something that I was showing you before, I wanted to focus on these columns. Sorry, here. We see that it's true that at short horizons, there is a decrease in volatility of output, but the trade-off is that this disruption of fintechs may create an increase in volatility of consumption. Private consumption increases significantly because of the changes that fintech will create in bank credit and also in the amount of sources that households get. So I ran out of time, so let me conclude very quickly. We've seen a dramatic expansion in the number of fintechs intermediaries in emerging markets, with fintechs being focused in unbanked firms. So in this model, it's very preliminary. We are getting this new data, and we want to make sure that this new data is reflected in the analysis. But so far, these preliminary results show that there are important implications for financial inclusions. It has competitive effects on the banking system and the credit markets, and also implications for business cycle and volatility in the economy. Fintech is going to relocate resources away from traditional banking, but this is going to overall have still a positive effect in the long term. And here, I didn't have time to explain much, but we're seeing to see that where is demand or supply, the root of an increase in fintech competition is going to matter. So that's it.
Okay,
Thank you so much. Yeah, you want to take the microphone, or what do you prefer?
Thank you. Thank you. And do you have the...
The clip, yeah.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to be discussing this very interesting paper just presented by Shapiro, Maldeman, and Nuger. And so I will skip this part that just synthesizes the contributions of the paper and what the paper does, but basically they address a very important gap in the literature by showing the macroeconomic consequences of the recent fintech entry in emerging markets. And what I want to do is to discuss the potential difference between fintech and traditional banks, and the broader concept of financial inclusion that might be an aspect that the model could maybe incorporate, because many fintechs that are entering the emerging markets now, they are payment institutions, so they cannot actually grant credit by law, but they participate in the important financial inclusion in the sense of allowing many firms and individuals to participate in more efficient in the formal payment system. So, like if you look at this graph, we can see that the main segments of fintechs by countries in Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and Colombia are payment and remittances. And loans are very important, but still payments are even more important. So maybe the productivity of firms could be increasing also by they being able to actually spend more efficiently and transact more efficiently, maybe to even to sell for others using different methods of payments, like credit cards and so on. And as we can see, payment institutions here in Brazil, for instance, I'm leaving some fintechs that grant credit, but for these payment institutions that many fintechs are characterized by law as, service provision accounts for like 96% of its revenue, which contrasts a lot with the traditional financial institutions like banks. So maybe their source of revenue and their cost of entry would be in another segment also. So they are competing with banks in credit sometimes, but sometimes they are competing with banks in payment systems. And this could also increase the productivity of firms. Maybe just this aspect. So my question would be, what would be the role of the broader aspect of financial inclusion fostered by fintechs in emerging markets, having accounts tied to the capacity to have more efficient transfers, payments, and sales and savings on financial stability and other macro outcomes? So that's...
Okay, Federico, do you want to answer the question?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, you want?
Sorry, should I receive questions or?
No, just
Okay.
right now, just the question from the discussion. At the end, we will have questions from the audience.
No, absolutely. And I think that one of the what are the limitations that we have, and what's the data. So we wanted to do this like a high frequency analysis, and we clearly distinguish that there is an issue that payments and credit, and so far it's mostly like personal lending, via credit cards and essentially easing the payments system. So the credit is still a very nascent, but what we are seeing is true that many of these fintechs are not giving credit directly to firms, but are giving credit to individuals. And it happens even in developed countries where which individuals are putting some collateral to get credit from fintechs, personal credit, but that credit can be used to finance their own enterprise or micro enterprises. So this is the channel we are trying to exploit so far. But it's true that this is an evolving world. I said that fintechs are increasing, in number 50%, but also they are spreading their activities very quickly. And probably credit markets are still largely dominated by banks, but as fintechs start capturing more and more deposits, they are going to have a bigger say in credits. And also, something is interesting is that if you can track payments, either for inputs, labor, and if you can track revenues, it's very easy to make an assessment of how creditworthy you are. So that will give them like an information hedge that maybe for traditional banks, they have to establish many years of financial relationships, of bank lending relationships with customers. But for fintechs, the fact that they have all this information that is clearly available to them through the daily transactions may encourage them to increase credit. But something that we didn't touch is the regulation. No, regulation is, and we try to make this more like a general picture. For macroeconomists, you will be surprised that the literature on fintechs a macro, like fintechs as financial intermediaries in macro models is practically non-existent. So we didn't want to go in something very detailed. We just wanted to say, okay, like a big picture of how these, agents that are growing so quickly can disrupt financial markets and how that may affect macroeconomic outcome through the lens of, yes. But we know that still is a very nascent, and so we will see more to come, and it's good that we're getting data, and we hope to, as we get data, to refine the analysis. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe to do this separation between payment institutions.
Yes, that's something. Yeah, that's true. That's something that we didn't model correctly, and I think it's an important distinction that should be made. Okay. Oh well, thanks a lot for taking the time to read the paper. Okay.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Felipe and Frederico. Felipe, now back to you for your presentation, please.
Thank you. So in this paper, we simply analyze actually it's a pretty straightforward paper because we try to investigate what is the data accumulation of conditional cash transfer beneficiary households. And so we explore quasi-experiments to understand what they do in terms of data accumulation when they receive the benefit and when they lose the benefit. So specifically, how does receiving or losing conditional cash transfer affect poor household data accumulation? And we try to answer investigate two hypotheses. The first one is that conditional cash transfers use credit card to maintain a minimum living standard when they lose the benefit. So when they receive the benefit, they won't do anything because they are receiving a positive liquidity shock. So they will use the cash grant to increase their household living standard. But when they lose the benefit and they are already habituated to this new standard of consumption, then they will use credit cards because it's a bare minimum, but it's a new bare minimum that they will not be willing to reduce. And this is a behavior that is compatible with the habit model. And we are seeing here also a case where household members are still in a very economically active age. So differently from the standard case of negative income shock, expected negative income shock of retirement, here households, they are actually in an active age still. So they can potentially compensate the loss by working more. And especially we will be seeing the situation in which the youngest member of the household is becoming an adult. So it's a possibility that he will start working also. The other hypothesis is that the conditional cash transfer through the eyes of the credit agent that grants the credit, and this is particularly true for productive microcredit, which is specific to a certain region in Brazil, but not to others. This credit agent collects the information from the household on site. So given that all these households are majorly in informal markets and doesn't have a fixed income, conditional cash transfer might be at least some reliable information that the credit agent has about the household. So it can work as a pseudo-pledgeable income for households. And this would make the credit agent want to give better credit with better conditions to these households, even in situations we might not expect so. Like when the household is losing the benefit, and still getting richer because of higher labor income, higher, even formal labor income in some cases. But so the highlights of the results, just to save time really, is that credit cards expenditures increased both at extensive and intensive margins when the household lose the benefits entirely, and also when they lose partially. But when they lose partially the benefit, it's only the intensive margin that will increase. So only households that were already spending and using credit card, they will use it more when they lose the benefit, if they don't lose everything. Then we also find that losing the conditional cash transfer increases labor supply, because we observe formal labor markets here. And so we can see that someone in the family, or the family as a whole, is having a higher probability of having someone in the formal market there, but only when all the conditional cash transfer is lost. For households that stay receiving a minimal baseline level of CCT, they don't increase their labor supply. And the third one, related to the second hypothesis, is that microcredit supply seems to be sensitive to the conditional cash transfer. So while still receiving the benefit, households will get better conditions, lower rates, longer terms, even when we observe that they are becoming richer because of potentially increased labor supply. So the contribution here, we know that CCTs affect child health and nutrition, increase child school enrollment and attendance, reduce child labor, reduce also labor market participation of female young adults, usually the mothers of the child. So the contribution here is to see the effects of CCT on credit outcomes. In particular, we can see that from the results that they indicate that credit card can work as a substitute for CCT. And this might be good or bad, because it might help households smooth consumption and keep the same baseline level of consumption until they get a job and and can get actually a higher household income. But could also be bad, because we also observed an increase in revolving credit, which is a very expensive credit line. So it can be good, it can be bad, and it's also consistent with a hand-to-mouth consumption pattern. They don't save and they consume everything they have. Once they have it, they are habituated to consuming at a certain level. They will use credit card to keep that same level of consumption. And credit directly to the poor, productive microcredit, seems to be sensitive to CCT. Another branch of the literature is related to the impacts of credit and grants on household wealth, also to the real effects of consumption, consumer debt accumulation and default, and consumption response to income shocks more specifically. So we will be observing an unexpected income increase, and just saying that there's not really a big change. The only change that we observe when this occurs, actually a small increase in formal entrepreneurship from households that are extremely poor. And this is consistent with the literature that says that might relax the liquidity constraints of very poor households and enable them to become entrepreneurs. But there's no effect on credit card, and also we don't observe higher debt accumulation when they receive unexpectedly. And from the anticipated negative income shock, it's related to the retirement case that is traditional in the literature. But the difference here is that in the retirement case, they know they will have an income reduction, but they are reducing also their labor supply, which is very much different from the case we are observing here, where they are, the majority of household members are actually are pretty young. So the contributions is to estimate the effects of unanticipated and potentially anticipated income shocks for poor households with no or very small savings, when most of its members are in an economically active age. And we observe increased formal labor employment when households stop receiving the entire of the transfer. And we only observe formal labor, so we might expect that informal effects on labor market are even greater. So the data, we combine Cadastro Único, which gives us social information about household composition, and CCT information, also SCR, which gives us every credit line the household as a whole has, with the conditions, the interest rates and terms. And we have formal employment information from HAIS, and Receita gives us information of if there is any formal entrepreneurs in the household. We have monthly data from 2018 and December 2019, and we compared the two states, Ceará and Minas Gerais, which differ a lot in terms of microcredit concession. Here we have a microcredit per capita concession in Brazil in red line, Minas Gerais in the blue line, and Ceará in the green line. So we can see that Ceará has a lot of microcredit per capita, so we might expect exactly that the debt accumulation of these poor households will depend on the labor market conditions. Actually, the credit market conditions. And so CCT in Brazil, there's a Bolsa Família program that provides financial aid to the poor households under conditionalities such as for underage children less than 18 years old to attend school. So unless the household is extremely poor, in which case it will have a household per capita income lower than 89 reais, it will have to have a young child. So there's a transfer that is related to the extreme poverty condition, and there's a transfer that is related to the young child. So this first group, we will be observing when they lose the benefit, they will lose only the benefit related to the young child, while the second group will lose the same benefit, which is everything it receives. So the identification strategies, I will use a change in the eligibility thresholds for these two groups that change in July 2018, and I will select the households that at this month had already updated the registry before the law was announced. So they could not anticipate that this change was happening and would not change their reports, their income reports accordingly, just to get in the exact range here. So this we will instrument then the condition of being within this range, and for the second group and having a child because it's a necessity, and we will instrument the conditional cash transfer condition with these groups here. And as we can see, for extremely poor households, exactly in this month, there's a sharp discontinuity in the probability of having conditional cash transfer for the group in the newly eligible group. And we will do a two-stage diff in diff for this, and we will do exactly the same for the poor households, and we can see the graph is pretty much the same actually. And there's not much here to see in this table. There's only minor effects on credit concessions and a small reduction on credit card usage for extremely poor households. But we can see that there's also a small increase for extremely poor households in formalization, in entrepreneurial formalization. For the anticipated loss, we use a regression discontinuity, exploring exactly the time that households will lose the benefit related to the youngest child. And this benefit, we can explore by creating a running variable that is making the age of the youngest child be continuous along the running variable. So this important confounding factor, we are trying to overcome it by capturing the effect exactly at the threshold. So as we can see here, at this threshold, which is the end of the year the youngest child completed 18 years old, there's a sharp discontinuity in the probability of having conditional cash transfer for poor households. And we explore exactly this. And if we plot along the same running variable, the youngest child age, we can see that it is continuous along the running variable. So we will be comparing households right at the threshold. So that's our identification. And going to the results, we see that at the extensive margin, there's only effect for poor households, but at the intensive margin, there's effect also for extremely poor households. And there's also increase for revolving credit. So the probability of having revolving credit increases also for extremely poor households, but increase a lot more for poor households. So they are losing everything and they're increasing more. At the same time, here we can see, just going fast.
5 minutes, Philippe.
Okay. That the credit conditions, analyzing productive microcredit, the mean interest rate of microcredit, and also the max term, that we don't know if it's microcredit, we will see eventually with the new data. But when they lose the benefit, the mean interest rate increases of microcredit, and the max term increases for extremely poor and poor households in Ceará. And in Minas Gerais, there's also some effects, but we will actually try to improve this by selecting, instead of Ceará in Minas Gerais, we will select municipalities based on the number of credit agents of Banco do Nordeste, which is a bank that is pretty much the most important for granting productive microcredit around the country. But as we can see, we have already a hint that the conditional cash transfer actually makes a difference for the decision of the credit agent in terms of interest rate and max term. We don't have a lot of effects on delay, which only minor effects up to 30 days, but this doesn't necessarily mean much. And we have a 20% increase in the probability of poor households having a formal employment after the loss, but not for extremely poor households. And this might be also related to the fact that poor households might have a greater ability than extremely poor households. So we cannot actually assume or discard the possibility that extremely poor households are also increasing, but in informal labor supply. So, which is something that we do not observe. That's basically it. So the conclusions, we find evidence that households use credit cards to substitute the income lost from the CCT. And differently from the retirement case, losing all the CCT generates an increase in credit card expenditures, at least partially from an increased labor income, which is something that could be thought as positive, because they are sometimes even more than compensating the loss from the conditional cash transfer from increased labor market income, even though there's an argument that conditional cash transfers, exactly the most important part is the conditionalities that will make young individuals go to school and etc. And we also find that productive microcredit concessions are sensitive to conditional cash transfer, indicating it can work as a pseudo-pledgeable income. So we find positive evidence for both the hypotheses that we brought up. So that's it.
Great.
First of all, I would like to say that it's a pleasure to be able to comment on this paper that is being carried out within the scope of a project in the partnership between research from the central bank and academy. And I understand that the topic addressed in this paper is a great importance because it's focused on an important public policy, Bolsa Família, which benefits the poorest part of the population. Now in the effects of loss of revenue of these families from this program, it's relevant to us to design complementary policy that allow for a more perennial exit and with an increase to well-being of these families. For example, knowing that the loss of benefits can generate an increment in the use of credit can be good indication of the needs of financial education actions for these publics around the time of transfer termination. Increase in employment and entrepreneurship may indicate the possibility of the parallel action as well done some times ago with the progressive program to enable to more perennial source of income. Regarding my doubts and suggestions for the works present, I leave several comments in the text that I will pass to Frederico after the section. You can remind me if I forget. In these 10 minutes, I just want to address some of relevant points. The first doubt I have when read your paper was the reason of using only the federation units of Ceará and Minas. I understand that the choice of Minas was due of its characteristics being more similar of the aggregated profile of the country, and Ceará doing its differentiated profile in microcredit. Okay. However, reading the text, the comparison between of this state, I understand that this would be a bit premature to attribute the observed differences to microcredit. So, couldn't the assessment of all states in this analysis be more interesting? This could even show some location with more relevant difference that could serve as a starting point to a better understand of the factor that can influence these behaviors of exit from the Bolsa Família. And another, if the objective is really to study the possibility effect of microcredit, shouldn't Ceará be compared with another state with a profile more similar to it, however, with a weak microcredit market? Is there any reason to use the period of 2018 and 2019? I'm asking, therefore, precisely in this period that we have a strong action from the Minister of canceling approximately 1.3 million benefits due to the identification of a fraud. Another item that I was a doubt is if in information of the family group is the youngest child who turned or will turn 18 included? If so, might not the increased credit be due to the increased access of the new adult? Looking at the graphic, this graphic prepared by my co-author Gabriel, we see that in general, and not for the specific public of Cadastro Único, it appears that the people who were born in January 2000 show a gradual increase in the use of credit starting January 2018 when they turn 18. Even selecting all people who was born in 2000 and 2001, we notice a gradual increase in the use of the credit for both groups when individuals reach an age of 18, which may indicate that such behavior does not seem to be specific to one group. In this way, we understand that it would be interesting if we could rule out that the observed effects of increased use of credit is due to this general behavior of increased access, but to the event of losses of income due to the age of the youngest child reach 18. Perhaps a way to access this would be a placebo test with the application of this model to a data set of people do not have access to Bolsa Família and the identification of a non-significant coefficient of the threshold variable. Again, I emphasize that the topic is relevant, and I hope to be able to help to improve this paper. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mikil, very much for the comments. They are very, will certainly help me improve the paper. Addressing your question about Ceará and Minas that you anticipated to me very kindly before. That was exactly the reasons choosing Ceará that has a lot of microcredit, and Minas Gerais that is similar to Brazil. But now what you are saying, you are correct, because it would make more sense to choose a state that is similar to Ceará, but doesn't have a very developed microcredit market. And what we are trying to do now is to select information on credit agents and also on bank agencies at the municipality level, and to take the per capita municipality I don't know, financial deepening or something like this, and to select maybe according to quartiles. But now that you are saying, maybe we could just separate this new index of microcredit per municipality by quartiles, and to select in the upper quartile, maybe municipalities will be from Ceará, but in the lower quartiles, municipalities from the Northeast region that might be more similar in terms of cultural aspects, to actually compare groups that are similar. But we are trying to address this, then I will talk to you more about it. And just about the differences between the age, yes, it's really a problem. And I observed this actually because I was doing the diff and diff before of the lost, and I observed exactly this. It's a pretty nice effect actually. You see that is losing and increasing almost everything, but it's from the age of the youngest child. And I actually use a placebo group that is not great because are individuals that are above the upper limit threshold to receive the CCT, so they don't receive anyways. So they will not lose the benefit, and the effect in the placebo group, even though it was smaller, was happening also. So I'm using only the RDD, and I will try to use your strategy to use everybody that is not in Cadastro Único and try to see if the effects are null. I expect that they will be, and I'm also doing an extension of the RDD that actually replicates a leads and lag graph from a diff and diff, so you can see not only the aggregate value of losing the benefit over the year, but the marginal increase in every month. So like, as you have in diff and diff, the leads and lags graph, I can simply select the months each month and do it again. And then I will be comparing right at the thresholds. They were born in different years, but in the limit, I will be comparing, for instance, someone that was born, whose youngest child was born in December 31st, with a household whose youngest child was born in January 1st the next year. So in the limit, but that's it. There's also some possible thing that someone can say is that, but you can, you have an education change because maybe the one that was born in the previous year has to study less than because of, I don't know, mandatory school law, but maybe the main problem will be overcome. But with the placebo, I think it helps a lot. But I think that's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mikio.
I would like to thank the opportunity of present, and today I will present the paper, The Long-Term Impact of High School Financial Education, Evidence from Brazil. This is our work joined with Miriam Brum and Bilal Zia from the World Bank and Gabriel Garber from BCB. And the usual disclaimers apply. Well, we know that the financial literacy improves the financial decision for many types. So there is a role of financial education to improve financial literacy. Government and other stakeholders are looking for the most effectiveness way to distribute it. Teach financial education in school is a appealing option because this public is a receptive age for content in the general, habits is information, and the most of life is ahead to take advantage of better choice. However, some people can argument that this could be a bad choice because their financial life has not started, so then are not ready to receive financial education. Others argument that the students forget then they time they will need financial education. They might not remember what was taught, making investment useless. By the way, in the end of the presentation, I expect to have convinced you that both arguments against financial education in school are wrong. Well, the literature about financial education has established that program has strong effects of financial knowledge and weak but significant effects of financial behavior. However, most studies mention only in the short time, less than 1 year, and accepted the financial that examine for 2 years in this program of Peru. So there is a lack of evidence that the program can affect the long-run behavior, which is necessary for investment to make sense. What we do in this paper, we use data in Anual RCT with nearly 900 schools and 25,000 students implemented in Brazil in 2010, 2011. Then we find 16,000 of these students in administrative data that include using of financial products and employment outcome, and follow students for 9 years after the end of the program. It's important to mention that this present project was possible only the collaboration of ANF and CVM and within the central bank. There were many collaborators, in particular from the Financial Citizenship Department, is here represented by Luis. The financial education program that was applied is distributed. Taught over 3 semesters during the regular curriculum of mathematics, science, geography, history, and covered several topics like short-term, daily life, family life, social life, and entrepreneurship. This topic is very important because we show in the results. Now, about the experimental design, the 1892 public high school from 6 Brazilian states that participate in the RCT was grouped into matched pair based on school and municipality characteristics. Then one school of each pair was randomly selected to receive one the treatment, another the control group. At the end, one important information is that at the end of the RCT, the student graduated, meaning that control group students were not exposed to the financial education program. In order to find the students from the experiment in BCB administrative database, we need to obtain their taxpayer ID number, the CPF. It was a very difficult work, but we are be able to identify nearly 16,000 IDs. When we compare them with a subsample with which we have ID reported in the experimental data, and only less than 3% are different. This table is a balance check of characteristics of school and the student in the longer run sample. The only variable that we have a difference between the group is the gender, which we address including female dummies in our specification. But this is the list of administrative data source that we use, and only to mention, we use the Register of Client of Financial System, CCS, Credit Register System. It's a very important database from the central bank that we have information about the product, credit product, the annual report of social information, the federal government revenue service, register of firms, and in addition, we build a proxy of informality using a data set of the COVID Relief Transfer Program. This is our estimating equation. On the left side, we have a financial behaviors and the occupational outcomes. And the right side, we have the treatment dummies with beta here, the coefficient of interest. We also have a dummy for each school pair. I told you about when we talk about the research design. A dummy indicating when study is a female, and monthly region fixed effects, and we cluster the error at the school level, but that is a school. Now I will start showing you the results. First, check out these graphics of account ownership. Although some people argument that high school students don't have yet a financial life, what we found is that in the 2 years to high school, 35% of students acquired accounts. And in the next 2 years, additional 38% acquired accounts. Although this is just one dimension of exposure of the financial system, this number places interest in high school as a teachable moment for financial education. Also, there was no difference in this behavior between treatment and control group. This is the main results regarding using the credit. We use data from the credit register starting in June 2016, when we reported when the reporting threshold fell to 2,000 reais. The first column, we have the result of using or not using credit. We can see that the treatment students have a lower probability to use credit. When we break these variables in credit categories, we find these effects comes from the most expensive type of credit, like credit card debit and overdraft. And when we compare the estimated coefficient with the prevalence in the control group, we obtain that the treatment lead to reduce a 5% in credit card purchase, 6% in credit card debit, and 8% in overdraft. And this graphic is very interesting because you can see that the difference between the groups persistent years after years with no sign to fading away. There are the results of delinquency. We define two variables aggregating delay. The first one is the term that indicate that individuals have delay but not loans category as losses. And the other is the term indicating if individual has losses, if it occur after 1 year of the delay. On the panel of the left, you can see that the treatment students are 60% less likely to have delay, but almost 6 to have losses. It's a strange, but we realize that some losses, once informed, tend to stay in the system for many years. So we purged the operation that has losses informed in June 2016 and found that the effects of over losses fades away, while the effects of delay is preserved. This is the graph of delinquency variables. I need to speed. Now, let me tell you about the effects of occupation. Bearing in mind that the intervention had a lot of contents about work and entrepreneurship. For these results, we split the sample in 2 periods. The first period includes the 7 years that follow high school, when we think students have a higher likelihood to be improved to college education. The second one includes the remaining part of panel, when we believe that most of those who are studying would have graduated. Unfortunately, identify microdata regarding college enrollment was impossible to obtain. What we find is that in the second period, there seems to be a shift from the formal employee to entrepreneur, proxy to owning individual micro-entrepreneur firms. Formal employment followed by 3%, and male ownership increased 10%. We also mentioned impact over an informal activity proxy, and the effects over that proxy was is not very significant, but the 3 points estimate sum to a figure very close to 0. This is the evaluation of the formal employments in both groups, which becomes larger from 2016 onwards. And here you can see that the effects of micro-entrepreneurships ownership and enterprise ownerships emerging over time. And I almost finished. And the conclusion, the program having lasting effects on student financial behaviors and employment outcome. On the longer run, treatment students were less likely to use expensive source of credit than control student, and then performs better. Treatment students were less likely to hold formal jobs and more likely to own formal entrepreneurships than control studies. This is probably related to the model of work and entrepreneurs of the program. And finally, there is no evidence that the size of the effects decline over the time. Thank you.
Well, it was a very interesting paper. Although it's not my area of research, I learned a lot of it. Actually, there is a lot of work being done, a lot of databases. Very interesting work. So let me summarize what is this. It says randomized controlled trial experiment in Brazil. So we have that during 2010 and 2011, it was implemented, this program of comprehensive financial literacy. It involves a lot of schools, almost 900 schools in 6 states in the country. And there is a previous paper studying this, but that paper was written 6 years ago, and the focus of the first paper was in the short term. What are the short-term implications or the short-term effects on a student from this experiment? So this is actually like the second episode of that paper, because it focuses on what we call long-term effects. That is, this program follows 16,000 students for the next 9 years. So it's very interesting. So let me quickly summarize what I think are the main results coming from this paper. When we look at the treated students, I mean the students that were randomly chosen to take these financial literacy courses, we see that these treated students are less likely to use expensive credit in the long run. So the numbers are not big, but they still are meaningful, like they are less 1.4% less likely to use credit cards, or same similar numbers with overdrafts. They also have lower loans with repayment delays, so they seem to be more financially responsible. Something that was mentioned here is that the results are fairly persistent. So either 5 or 9 years later, the results are essentially the same. Something that is remarkable as well is that they are about 10% more likely to own enterprises. And we have to highlight here, as it was mentioned, that not only they learn about financial literature, but also about micro-entrepreneurial skills. But what I will focus next is on a finding that for me was very passing. So I told you before that treated students were less likely to use expensive credit in the long run. But if we compare these results to the previous paper, the first paper, it was the opposite. In the very short run, treated students were actually much more likely to use expensive credit. So maybe the message we have to take is that in the very short run, they invested in these risky financial tools. Maybe they have a bad experience, they learned the lesson, and after 9 years, they became much more cautious of what they were doing with their money. So in summary, once again, let me highlight this very interesting, very well written, carefully executed. I think that this topic of financial literacy not only has received a lot of interest, but also a lot of money from policymakers across the world. And there are very few RCT papers on financial literacy. And interestingly, this is the first one studying the so-called long-term effects, not only the immediate impact of this training on the students, but also what happens with these students over an extended period of time. So let's see, the focus will be, we have this puzzle. Why is that in the long term, they are less risky, but in the short term, actually, they are more inclined to take credit card debt and something like that. So the first comment I have is that sometimes maybe knowing less might be better. It's true that financial education may be useful, but also financial education may teach you about some financial tools that you may not aware that exist. And this is related with the paper it was presented yesterday about this credit that was pushed into people that didn't have the tools to deal with it. So I give you an example here. So one of the intended lessons of this financial literature will be that credit cards are safe to make transactions and are also useful to confront occasional unexpected expenses. But we also know that they are very expensive. So that's the intended lesson. If you need to use them for occasional expensive, do it. You can take debt. They're also very safe, but you have to learn that they're also very expensive to carry a balance on it. Maybe that's the intended lesson. But the unintended lesson from this is that actually getting a credit card may be much easier than you thought. And also you can carry a balance for years. So that could be the unintended lesson. No? So first of all, credit cards are good, but are expensive. But then all of a sudden you realize that, you know what, you can get a credit card fairly easy. And not only we've seen this, during COVID, we have a boom in financial education, I will call it, in social media during the lockdown. This is mostly in developed countries, but we see that people with practically no knowledge of financial literacy, they started trading call and put options on margin over smartphones, through apps like Robinhood. We know that these are good to hedge, when you use puts and calls, but also this trading in option is a very good instrument to leverage up your bet. And actually, and often with devastating results, people losing all their money from one day to another. So I think that put into context, there is a quote that by Keynes that may be relevant, is that most of our decisions can be the result of an animal spirit and not the outcome of expected gains. So, and this quote may be particularly relevant for teens that are learning these financial tools. So they learn about what are the expected returns of investing of using these financial tools. But if these teens are, and teens usually are not very risk averse, are far less risk averse, this could lead to taking too much risk out of these financial tools. So the question I have for you is that we know that females usually are much less risk averse. So I wonder where they took a better advantage of this course. So probably they didn't engage in too much debt at the beginning, and then over time they better take advantage of this course. So the other question I have is whether this financial literacy is just a substitute for math. We know that most useful lessons you get from these courses are actually the math lessons. So it will be interesting to see whether in regions where they have a stronger average math test results, the gains from financial literacy were different. So if you have different states, you have different regions, maybe in some regions they have much stronger math test results, and maybe they can take better advantage or less advantage from these courses. Alternatively, I know that the data is very limited, but you can look at regions where they have a higher college enrollment, and where this will give different results after 9 years. More generally, something that I know that, it's hard to get, but if you have like richer individual characteristics of the students 9 years later, like what is the educational attainment, what is the income or the current employment status, that would tell us more about the actual success of the program. Okay? And the other thing I highlight here is about the economic cycle and whether that could be affecting some of the results. So something that is interesting to see is that this course, it was taken in 2011. And 2011 was right at the peak of the commodity super cycle for Brazil and for the region. But after that, we in Brazil experienced deep and long recession in the coming years. So I know, I just put here, and I know this is the Brazilian index. I plotted, this is what you see there is the US, the Brazil stock big cap index. But it's interesting to see that between 2012 and 2011, the 10 years before this course was taken, the Brazilian stock index multiplied by a factor of 12. But then in the following 8 years, it lost essentially everything back. So lost 70% of the gains obtained through these years in the coming 8 years. Of course, I'm not saying here that the students invested in the stock market, but the correlation between this big cap index and the small cap index actually is almost close to 1. And one can infer that, if these guys were involved in micro businesses, the fate was fairly similar. So probably the years before 2011 were years of economic abundance. So they rely on that historical performance to make decisions. But then once they learned the tools in 2011, the timing could be worse. Why? Because after that, the economy went down. So probably they started their micro businesses, but then the bad timing of the course may have distorted the actual gains from financial education. So run out of time. Very interesting, carefully executed paper. I just repeat what I said before. And I think that it's very valuable that it's the first one studying the long-term effects. And I hope that it's only 9 years. I want to see more of this, what happens in 20 and after retirement. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Federico, for the comments. And about the difference between the short run and the long run it's a topic that we studied better because it's understand is why we need to understand what this result is so different. In part, we understand that the student that pass for this problem of use the credit too early and have a delinquency, they learn with this experience. But we select another group that don't have this experience, and in this group you see the same results in the long run. Then we try to understand this different group, but in both the effect is the same on the long run. About the question of if the the females more advantage to this program, I understand that the financial education has a benefit for all public. Obviously, we put this dummy of female in our, but because the difference in the group that we can find the information, but it's a content that we can benefit everyone. And in another study we use we have some information about the results of the students along the normal math class, and I don't remember well, but the mathematics cannot substitute it's not a perfect substitute of the financial education. There are sobreposition in part, but the financial education has your increase of the behavior of this who learn of this, and about the conditional of the country. I understand that the methodology that we use, the diff and diff, in part is eliminated this problem. But I'd like to thank you for the comments.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mikio. I'd like to thank the panelists for the excellent papers and presentations. I now turn to the audience for questions that you might have.
Hi, I have two questions. One in the first paper. So it seems that in the model, a lot of the effects are coming from, the increase in the number of fintech companies. But it seems that a lot of banks, what they are doing is actually adopting these technologies themselves. So it's not coming from, like, the effects of your model could very well come from having the same number of competitors, but banks, investing in alternative credit scorings or whatnot that allow them to expand financial inclusion to firms. So just to hear your thoughts. On the second paper, I am a bit concerned with the regression discontinuity design, because it doesn't seem to me that you're using an exogenous shock, no? So this is when the youngest child of a household turns 18. So it seems that at the left of your threshold, you're having families that next month or next year are going to be at the right of your threshold, right? So if I understood it well, then in your control group, you're having a set of households that are anticipating being left out of the program next year. So how are you thinking about that? Thank you.
Yes.
No, I fully agree with your comment. And not only the banks are going to behave more like fintechs, but also the fintechs are going to behave more like traditional banks. So if we want to make this analysis like a very long-term horizons, I think that the distinction may not be accurate. So I agree. I have to say it's a fair comment. We are not allowing for that in the model. But as I said before, it's the first paper of an area that has been understudied, so we wanted to make that distinction. Yeah. I don't know if...
Thank you for your comment. With respect to there is, of course, the possibility of anticipation, And one thing that I'm doing now is to segment the RDD by month. So I select the groups right before the change, those that were eligible. And I also do some robustness by not selecting exactly before, but a year before. And then I can follow the behavior of these groups before they lost the benefit. So just one point that the RDD does, and maybe I wasn't so clear, but the discontinuity doesn't happen exactly at the 18-year birth of the youngest child, but in the end of the year, the youngest child completed 18 years old. So right at the threshold, the only difference will be 1 day. And I can follow this threshold even before any group lost the benefit. So I have data from 2018, 2019, and I know that households whose youngest child were born in 2000 and 2001, in 2018, won't lost the benefit yet. So what I'm doing right now is to follow them with this RDD that captures the effect right at the threshold, that in which the difference between being in one side and the other side is in the limit 1 day. And I can see that there's no effect in the year that I'm expecting not to be, and also not anticipation. And there's a strong jump right in the month when the household loses the benefit that slowly fades away eventually. So with this, I will be able to capture, and also this doubt that maybe households are anticipated and maybe saving in anticipation to the loss. And I believe this will reduce then your concern that maybe they could be anticipating and the results that I'm getting might be due to some other reason other than the loss of the benefit.
Thank you, Felipe. Is there any other question from the audience to the panel? Well, great. I was just told that we are running out of time, so I'd like once. Oh, you have a question? Go ahead.
No, I can tell later, but I think for the comment that you had also, can you use only the credit card balances of the head of the household to rule out the problem that Sergio was mentioning?
Oh, yes. I'm right now getting the data from the youngest child, so I will partial out the youngest child credit consumption and every other credit, so I will have the household net usage of every credit line, and to see if the effect is coming from the youngest child that is becoming an adult, and maybe the year he or she was born makes a difference. So I will do exactly that, to partial out the youngest child.
Okay. So once again, I would like to thank our panelists and discussants for the excellent debate and presentations, and thank you all for coming here.